topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture and inspirational leadership activated by meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? In other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You'll learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us today Gill Ereaut. She is a British researcher, author, speaker, and organizational consultant. She's the founder of the consultancy Linguistic Landscapes, pioneering the commercial application of language sciences, linguistic and discourse analysis to real organizational issues. We'll be talking about her brand new book, The Way We Talk Around Here, How Your Organization's Culture Shows Up in Your Language and Why It Matters. She joins us today from Oxford. Jill, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It is wonderful to have you. And since we each, of course, have books published through Practical Inspiration, that's how I met you. I want to give a shout out to Alison Jones. She's magnificent. And I really, really enjoyed your book. I learned a lot. And I want to first start by celebrating. I'm not sure if you call yourself a linguistic anthropologist or how do you call yourself?
I usually try to avoid giving it a name, actually. But yes, linguistic anthropologist is a pretty good description in that linguistic anthropologists are all about how language influences social and cultural life. And linguistic anthropology is about how you can study culture through the use of linguistic tools. So the difference, I guess, between me and an academic linguistic anthropologist is the subject of study, which in my case is organizations.
Beautiful. It's wonderful. And I love that you're just obsessed with language. I think that's wonderful. And we're gonna talk about your approach to discourse analysis as we go. But first, I just want to situate. I really liked how you opened the book and talked about how, when newcomers come into an organization, they immediately detect the subtleties of the culture whereas their tenured brethren can't. So if you could just start by kind of helping us step into that place where that is such a very powerful way to detect culture through the ears, eyes, and experiences of those newcomers.
Sure. Most people have the experience or recognize the experience of first few days in a new organization, first few days in a new job. For the first few days, weeks, you can hear the way it talks, this organization. Even if you've come from within the same industry, there's something about this new place. And most people spend that first few weeks, months, just basically trying to learn the language, the acronyms, the code. But what you're also doing when you absorb the languages, you're absorbing what's not being said, the subtext, if you like, the culture that's sitting beneath that language. And then after a while, you can't hear it anymore. So when you're a newcomer, you're in a very powerful but not powerful position. You can hear it and you can sense the way things, the way we think about things around here in this new place, but you're often not in a position to comment on it because that would be rude or seem aggressive and so on.
Mm-hmm. One thing that struck me as you talked about that was how powerful it would be if organizations had the practice of engaging in conversation with the people that are coming into the organization and just asking them, what do you see? What are you noticing about how we do things here? What are you picking up on? And that would be so powerful to gauge. Are we actually putting out what we want it to be in terms of our culture and the way that we're operating? And I don't know of too many organizations that do that. Do you?
I think that's true. I think I wish I could remember who it was, but there was, I believe, a chief executive officer of a very large corporation who made it a habit to have one or two of his newest recruits in for, I mean, they must have been terrified, in for coffee or lunch with him. And he wanted to know their first impressions. He wanted to know what they'd noticed. But I don't think that's a common practice. What I often say to people who are interested when they first join an organization is to keep a notebook, just write down all the things that you notice in those first few weeks. Because particularly if you are in a position, a manager or a leader, that will be a resource, because you won't be able to hear it after a while. So your notebook will be a resource, thinking, I remember noticing that's a weird way we talk about customers around here. I've never heard that before. It's not that we necessarily have a different name for them, but there's a weird position that we kind of put them in when we're talking about them. Often people don't quite have the language to talk about the language, but they recognize that there's something powerful going on in how an organization, I would say, constructs. The technical term is how they're constructing the customer through the habits of language that surround them.
Mm. You're so succinct. That's not surprising, right? But you're so succinct, and I appreciate that. One of the things that you talk about, which of course I agree, because I do also some culture work as well, is that how important it is to be able to presence this, right? And what I really love too is that what we talk, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but when you start to share back what you're hearing, how people are using language, like for example, I just did something, let's see, in February, I was working with an organization and I kept hearing they were using, as I did the interviews, they were using language like, well, that would get me in trouble. And so there was a lot of that language, and I put it back up to them, and they were like, we had no idea we were even saying that, clearly indicating a lack of psychological safety. And you could see how it was impacting how they were putting forth ideas and whether or not they were willing to engage with those ideas. So I like the fact that, and it's important for this conversation to share with our listeners and viewers, how important it is to make it explicit what's actually being said and utilized for language inside an organization.
I think you can sometimes make it explicit yourself. I think sometimes it takes a shared conversation for everyone to share that experience and say, we do, don't we? That's weird. Where does that come from? And what's the implication? What is it we're saying about ourselves or about the culture here that we're always using that? And crucially, is that helpful to us? Is that something that we want to carry on with? But it is, I repeat, very difficult to see when you're inside the organization. Most newcomers just have to get on and learn it in order to do the job they've been hired to do. You don't have any spare bandwidth or time or relationships that you can work when you're new. So you need to note it down and then find a way of having conversations with people later. I'm just working with a group of young police officers, in fact, who are graduates into the British Police through a particular scheme, and talking with them 2 years in about the opportunity they have while they're still that new and they can hear the language and think and talk with their colleagues about what's the implication of that language, and maybe start to change it, or maybe start to go, well, that's funny, isn't it? I wonder why we do that. Do you think that helps our cause? Do you think that helps what we're doing when we have those habits of how we talk about people?
I think it's useful too to share with our listeners and viewers just really how you talk about culture, because it's one of those kind of words that is thrown about a lot, but I don't know that so many people really fully understand it. But I like what you say in the book. You say culture is the sum, effect, and enactment of unwritten norms and unspoken assumptions. It's not what's dictated from above, but is made and sustained every day by everyone. And it comes down to simple shared beliefs, habits, and rules of thumb. For most of the organizations we work with, there were perhaps up to 7 key ideas at the heart of how people operated at that time. I think that's really important, that idea of, up to, what'd you say, 7 key ideas that really
Wow.
dictate
Yeah.
how an organization is really run. That's powerful.
Mm.
If you knew those things.
Absolutely. And the trick, I guess, is to find a way to surface those things. And for me specifically, to hypothesize them, if you like, to look at an organization and help it to hear itself. And then to say, well, I'm not saying this is your culture, but from the way you talk around here, it looks like these are the things you say to yourselves all the time, but you don't say them. These are the implicit rules that everybody works to, like, you better watch out. You'll get into trouble very easily around here. Don't stick your head above the parapet because you'll get shot down, or other kinds of rules that can look quite perverse on the surface. And it's important that people then have the opportunity to recognize them, and they usually do if you get it right. And they are, we all need shortcuts. People need shortcuts in a complex world. And so I think about culture in a number of ways. One is an organization doesn't have a culture, it does culture. And culture is something you do day after day, in every decision, people set priorities and write strategies, but culture is how people operate and interact every day in the jobs they're doing. So it's in the micro decisions they make. Do I do this thing or do I do this thing? Of all the tasks I've got to do, do I choose this promotion or that promotion to send to customers? Do I go and consult these people or these people within an organization? The sort of, if you like, small decisions that actually make up organizational life. And I think culture is therefore a kind of living, breathing, moving, fluid thing, which makes it difficult to hang on to, but really, optimistically, it makes it easier to change, because it's not fixed in stone. The only way it gets fixed in stone is that we need shortcuts. So people need a kind of, I sometimes think of it as an if in doubt, I'll do this kind of set of rules. If in doubt, keep your head down. If in doubt, always consult legal. If in doubt, go to the shop floor and talk to them. There's sort of, we need easy ways to make those decisions without processing them cognitively every single time. And I think culture sort of sits at that semi-conscious level, not unconscious in a kind of Freudian sense, but certainly not conscious all the time. It's like it runs in the background all the time. If you can't see it, you can't change it. So you need to help people to be able to become conscious of it in order to consider how useful it is, in order to change it, and so on. So I think if you think about that, it's culture is what you do and not what you have. That instantly changes your view. And then if you insert the idea of habits and sort of, I sometimes think about thinking grooves. They're kind of, our thinking will always go down the easiest groove. It's quite difficult to push yourself out of a habit of thought. And that way, things just get done the same all the time. And a culture which has perhaps outlived its usefulness will be perpetuated, not because people are being stupid, and not because they're being evil, or not because they're being stubborn, or any of those things, but just because it's a habit and it's easier to follow a habit. Is that making sense?
Indeed, absolutely. Completely understand that. Yeah. And the other thing that I want to call out here and is just how you talk about how culture is the answer to 3 big questions. Can you talk about those big questions?
Sure. So over the 20 plus years that I've been developing this approach to culture, I realized that what we were finding all the time in mapping out patterns in organizations' language. So essentially, just to go back a step, what I would do is to sample language across an organization. So internal, like how they speak internally and how they speak externally, formally, informally, written, spoken, and so on. And look for patterns at quite subtle and overt, but also at subtle levels. And then when you see those patterns, what we're trying to work out is, what does it mean? And sorry, I've completely lost my thread. the three big questions. We realized that we were doing this inductively the whole time. And what can we see? What can we see? What can we see? And then realized that they fell into a set of three sort of clusters, if you like, of beliefs or types of idea. The first question, if you like, is who are we? Like, who are we? Really questions of identity and existence, and who are we and what's important around here. The second question is, who are they out there? Whether the they is customers or competitors or regulators or whoever the non-organization group is. And the subject to that one is, who are they out there and what do we really think of them? What's our position with regard to them? Because again, you will sometimes find some quite surprisingly toxic ideas. Mm-hmm. We worked with an organization once, for example, where it just became clear as we analyzed language that they fundamentally believed that customers were stupid. Their customers, their own customers, were stupid. Yeah. And you go, how can that be? How does that kind of work? And it dated back, actually, when we excavated it, to a time when it was a financial services organization and it had a very long history. And many decades ago, we kind of wanted our financial services institutions, in fact, all our institutions, to be clever. We just wanted them to know the stuff. And we weren't that interested culturally at the time in understanding things ourselves. We don't have that trust in institutions anymore, whether financial or governmental or anything. And so they were continuing to basically strut around and say, well, we're the people who know all the stuff, and the thing is, they buy these things, they don't know what they are, which is actually what they were saying. You see, they bought these pensions, and trouble is, they don't understand them. Not for a second seeing that as anything to do with them or anything that they could or should be addressing. And of course the world had moved on around them, and their competitors were cleaning up because they were addressing people like they weren't stupid. This is difficult stuff, but you're not stupid. Let's help you understand this, or let's give you the information you need to make an informed choice here. And I think it was really, really getting in their way. So the first one is, who are we? The second one is, who are they out there, and what's the relationship we're assuming with them, or the attitude we assume towards them. And then the third one is, how do we do relationships around here? So we've worked with companies, organizations where their position in most relationships is one of a slight arrogance is perhaps too strong a word, but a kind of, well, we are clearly the best. Mm-hmm. Yes, and well, obviously the best, and that leaks out into communications. That's the thing about these internal attitudes, especially ones when it comes to communications with customers. If you essentially believe that you as an organization are the best, the bee's knees, we would say, I don't know if you use that expression in the US, then that will come out in a set of language patterns. This particular organization, one I have in mind, would always start any communication with a little kind of linguistic fanfare. At XXX company, we are always striving to do so and so and so and so. And halfway down the page, I'd get to the bit that was actually for me and about me. Mm-hmm. And it was such a habit. And they didn't see it as a habit and then, of course, you show them the pattern and they go, oh, of course.
Oh, yes, of course.
That's what we do. And I can see why that's not helpful.
Let our listeners and viewers chew on that while we take our first break, thinking about those things that you're doing that may actually be running customers away from you or even your employees away from you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Gill Ereaut. She's at Linguistic Landscapes. She's pioneering the commercial applications of language sciences, linguistics, and discourse analysis to real organizational issues. We've been talking a bit about culture. What is it? How to recognize it. After the break, we're going to get into her actual method, which is discourse. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive, are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of my last ones came out. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. I wrote it to help leaders understand the lay of today's workforce land. What do they want? And then I provide 22 best practices to help equip you to provide that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Gill Ereaut. She's the author of The Way We Talk Around Here, How Your Organization's Culture Shows Up in Your Language and Why It Matters. So I was very intrigued to see your methodology, Gill, of discourse analysis. It's just really, really interesting. So for our listeners and viewers who probably have never heard of that, you did mention it a little bit before and what you're analyzing, but if you could just situate a bit about how you use discourse analysis in the internal and external ways of speaking or communicating.
Sure. Many of your viewers, I think, will be familiar with the work of Edgar Schein, who's one of the biggest names in organizational culture. And Schein talked about three, if you like, levels of culture. He talked about artifacts, which are the things on the surface that you can see, so the way the organization looks and rituals and practices and so on. Then he also talked about espoused values. I mean, we tend to call them claims and wishes. They're the things that an organization says it's about and often sincerely believes it's about, but may not necessarily match up with what happens. And then his third level, like the deepest level, he calls basic and tacit assumptions. And we usually abbreviate those silent assumptions. What's most interesting about artifacts is they are of many, many different kinds. I mean, he talks about the physical environment, how people dress and so on. But our method uses language as I call it in the book, a super artifact. It's a very, very powerful artifact. And it's great for a number of reasons. One is it gets everywhere. Everyone uses language in organization. There's no shortage of data, if you like, in fact, quite the opposite. It's also everybody uses it. So we're not just analyzing culture, if you like, as represented by the senior ranks or indeed by any one part of the organization. The other brilliant thing about language, two other brilliant things, is you can collect it and analyze it offline, out of the organization. Don't have to crawl all over the place for weeks to gather data. But the most important thing is that there is an enormous range of very well-grounded academic work in looking at how language works in social and cultural terms. So how we create and co-create our worlds linguistically, and that's where the anthropology piece comes in. And what discourse, those methods collectively are called discourse analysis. And what they offer are these extremely well-grounded, empirically based frameworks and ways of thinking about language. So that means that you can use it as a particular kind of artifact, take stuff away and analyze it in a systematic way. It's qualitative work, so we're not counting things. Right. Occasionally use some quantified approaches to very large bodies of data, but mostly it's qualitative. What you're looking for is meaning and significance, but it's systematic. And it means that we can show people in an organization, can show them the patterns and the language. Yeah. So we will gather internal and externally facing language. So it might include, we would of course look at all of those levels of Schein. So we'd look at what the espoused values and strategies and so on. So I'd want to look at strategy and policy documents. I'd want to look at high-level statements of values and purpose and intent and so on. I'd want to look at those actually, though, primarily as examples of the culture in action. So they're sort of manifestations of a culture rather than a definite or definitive description of it. So we use that language in I think a different way to the way that some other analysts might. We also would look at things like induction materials, like new joiner materials, because again, they sometimes make explicit things which are implicit and showing up everywhere. Sometimes you might find a piece of induction material that runs absolutely counter to what we can see on the ground, and that's quite important, you know, for recruitment, for development, and all sorts of tasks where people are trying to get a group of people aligned behind purpose and values and meaning, as you talk about, Elise. So we'd look at that kind of, if you like, the Shine's surface stuff, his espoused values, but we also want the really informal stuff that people don't pay any attention to. It's littering the place. You know, we like language litter. So internal memos, minutes, reports, emails, intranet pages, notices that are stuck on the walls and in the kitchens, you know, of offices. Really interesting. We work with one organisation where one of their unspoken kind of habits and values was that essentially everyone will behave like a child unless you tell them not to. It was a very parental kind of position. And it wasn't just a top-down one, although there was some of that, you know, from leadership, you know, behaving and acting in that way. But almost everyone in the organisation took that stance. So if a junior person had to send an email to all their colleagues, they would do it with a very parental voice. And one of the data points that we could show actually made people laugh, which is a helpful thing, is amongst all of the do's and don'ts in emails and so on, were notices in a kitchen where there were 3 versions of a note above a sink saying, don't leave your dirty dishes in here. Make sure you wash up your dishes. Don't leave your dirty dishes here. It was a sort of kind of shouting again and again of, this is our position here. You must do this. You will behave like a child unless we tell you not to. It's silly, but it's not silly. It's a tiny data point, but in the midst of all the other pieces that we could see, it was a great example because it was completely familiar to people. They'd never seen it before. So we collect stuff, you know, from values and so on, all the way through to intranet pages and notices on walls and notice boards. We would listen in to conversations, obviously with invitation, to conversations between colleagues in meetings. We would have some conversations with people. We want to look at things like organisation charts. Job titles are really revealing. We once worked with an organisation where, for various reasons, they had a kind of very tightly protected group within the organisation, which itself saw itself as tightly protected against the world. It had to have this kind of almost like a medieval moat around it. And there was a set of people whose job title was actually gatekeeper. That was what they were called.
Wow.
And their job was to stop people getting in or out to this holy sort of keep in the middle where the extremely important people were. And I mean, it was a gift in a way when we saw gatekeeper. We'd already begun to see that through lots of less overt language, but to have a job title in an organisation of gatekeeper, we'd never seen before. So that's what I mean by looking for patterns across different forms of data. We would look at a public website, we'd look at social media, we look at, if relevant, customer or user communications and so on. So what we're looking for, I keep saying patterns because that is what it's about. It's a bit like, I often say, if I hadn't discovered this world, I think I would probably be an archaeologist or a forensic scientist.
Yes, I see that.
Lots of looking a whole load of messy stuff, whether it's mud in the ground or whatever it is, and seeing very small indicators of a pattern, like very low signal to noise ratio pattern data. And as an archaeologist says, what might have been there, what must have been there in order to account for this pattern they can see on the ground. What we're saying is, maybe this is what's there, the unspoken stuff, to account for, it's the other way around, the way what's under, in order to account for these bits that are popping up in terms of language choices on the surface. So we would look at things like pronouns and labels, how our customers or colleagues or different parts of the organization referred to. We worked with a government organization in the UK, a very powerful government organisation that was attached physically in the same building to another extremely powerful government organisation. They had a relationship that was necessary but not always comfortable. And the first organisation we were working with would talk about our colleagues at the other end of the building in a very meaningful way. And effectively, the colleagues at the other end of the building was a subtext for those absolute pains in the neck, who think they run us and they don't run us. And it was just a little kind of a mantra that people would say. And when you see something repeated like that, and particularly where there's euphemism, there's meaning. So when people are using a euphemism so as not to say what they mean, that's always where we start digging, building we get our trowels out and start kind of scraping away and seeing what's there. We would look at styles of discourse. So sometimes in an organization you'll get a dominance, for example, of a particular kind of language. So a dominance of a legal way of thinking and talking, which spills out well beyond the legal department, or a dominance of marketing discourse that spreads across and into other parts of the organization. We're not commenting often on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but what we're doing is observing and reflecting, checking it's recognizable to people inside, and then together working out what this means for them. So we would also look at stories, we'd look at metaphors immensely valuable. I talked earlier about the organization that effectively constructed itself as a castle, with a big wall and a moat around it. A very, very powerful metaphor. And when they were able to see that, it made sense of a lot of their difficulties. It didn't solve them, but it helped them make sense of difficulties. And if you can have some sense of why you're in the state you're in, then that's a first step to changing something. So
wonderful. Oh, go ahead, Jill. Was something else you wanted to say?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and grab our last break here and let our listeners and viewers chew on that. Just think about, if you will, ladies and gentlemen, think about how this language, the way that it's used in your organization, is either helping you get the results that you want or preventing you from getting the results that you want. This is a really, really powerful powerful work that you do, Jill. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Gill Ereaut. She's at Linguistic Landscapes, and she's pioneering the commercial application of language sciences, linguistics, and discourse analysis to get to real organizational issues. We've been talking a bit more about her actual methodologies. Very, very powerful. After the break, we're going to get into also talking about gendered language patterns, as well as how this starts to show up in terms of results and what we can do with the data itself. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I mentioned in my last break that my latest book came out, The Great Revitalization, what I did for you is I created a simple 3-page organizational assessment that you can pull off my website, gusto-now.com, and it will help you understand the extent to which your organization is meeting the discerning needs of today's workforce. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Gill Ereaut. She's the author of The Way We Talk Around Here, How Your Organization's Culture Shows Up in Your Language and Why It Matters. So I want to just briefly touch on this idea of gendered language patterns and just consider the ramifications of that. That's so powerful. And I certainly work with other organizations as well that we're wondering, why can't we attract women around here? Why don't women want to come to work for this organization, or why don't they stay? So give us kind of a peek on, you talk about feminine discourse and then, of course, masculine discourse.
I mean, I think it's from observation, it seems to me over the years that pretty well all organizations are, if you like, gendered masculine. I don't mean they've got more men in them than women, although obviously maybe they have. But if you think about the idea of gender as something you, not something you have, but something you do. So we can do being feminine and we can do being masculine. I mean, that's how actors work. You know, if somebody wants to, you know, walk in a particularly masculine way, you know what they would do, how they do it. It's swagger and so on. And similarly, we can walk or talk in a particularly feminized way, regardless of our biological sex. So if you think of gender as something that can be done, then organizations do it too. So in how an organization not so much dresses, but certainly in how it talks. And a lot of organizational discourse across the board traditionally has been masculinized. And by that I mean, so I go here now to, you know, what's known and written about widely about the patterns in how, I always hesitate to say women, but how people talk when they are doing being feminine, and that means regardless of their state, if you like, their bodily state or their, but how do you perform being feminine? How do you do being feminine? And what we would tend to do to perform being feminine would be to be conversational. There is a lot of evidence that women use unassertive strategies, so hedging, and I'm probably doing it now, you know, saying, well, sort of and kind of and maybe, and adding tag questions and so on. And this is observational. This is just observing what happens. This is what putting labels or value judgments on this just tends to be what people are doing today. Historically, it would have been different. In the future, it may well be different, but right now, today. Women, if they are offering expertise or advice, they will tend to offer it rather than assert it, and so on. Offer it, and they may offer it only when they're pretty sure it's being asked for or will be welcome, rather than just because they want to give it. Asking questions is a very feminized form of language, and it's where necessary and useful asking questions. It's not seen in this form of talking this as being weak or as betraying a lack of status, and feminized talk tends to be collaborative, so not competitive. Now you can see where I'm going with the opposite of this at the extreme, and I'm characterizing, almost like caricaturing, masculine discourse. Masculine talk will tend to be showing ritual opposition and competition, jokes, banter, sort of play fights, if you like, linguistic play fighting is banter, teasing. You'll see a lot of war metaphors, sporting metaphors, debate, open disagreement. And interestingly, as many of us know, many men will do anything other than ask a question or ask for directions. I mean, let's not go there. But because asking questions betrays a lack of knowledge or status. Asking a question kind of puts you in a position of having to confess you don't know, and so on. And this obviously runs counter to all the other stuff about dominance. And what's so interesting, it doesn't take a huge leap to see that within an organization, classically, it doesn't happen so much now, but classically, a dominance, for example, of numbers and graphs and spreadsheets in PowerPoint presentations, charts with hard lines and numbers and so on, rather than, for example, an alternative. It's almost hard to imagine, but PowerPoint slides making the same kind of argument or point, but using human voices or using images or narratives, which be less masculinized. And again, many people will recognize that in a masculinized kind of language or discourse, it's all about problem solving. So responding to problems by offering solutions rather than by listening or empathizing. So, I don't want you to sort this out for me. I just want you to give me a hug and say, I understand how you feel. I mean, equivalent of. So we have these, some I have caricatured them. So, I hope people aren't getting too vexed about, well, I'm a girl and I don't talk like that. But they are resources. If you think of those, all of the different ways that we have to talk as resources that we can draw on anytime to do a particular job. So whether you're a biological man, biological woman or something else, you can use language in a way that is assertive and dominant and so on, or you can use language in a way that's empathetic and so on. And organizations can sometimes get in their own way like this. So either one of the examples I use in the book is of an organization that really, really sincerely wanted to attract more women to engineering roles. And they had tried all sorts of things with some success. And we looked for them at a simple job ad, an online job ad, trying to attract women into a form of, it was sort of, it was an engineer job, but it was a communications engineer. So somebody who would go out to a customer's house, it was telecoms, and fix their Wi-Fi essentially. And at the overt level, there was absolutely nothing that said this was a job for men. But when we unpicked it, it used a whole cluster of little phrases that fitted better into that masculine discourse. So the thing talked about, you need to be sort of prepared to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty. Yeah. Which just skews slightly that way. Each one of those data points would not have been enough, but the cluster of them was enough. So we kind of fixed it for them in that we suggested a rewrite, which didn't make it feminized. So we weren't going, hey girls, come and work here. What we did was just genuinely neutralize it linguistically. And they did a before and after test, and their expressions of interest went up by 200% or something very gratifying, because before people had said, well, it doesn't really sound like a job for me, and after many women said, oh, maybe sounds quite interesting, really. And that, of course, then they have to go through the next stage. So getting in their own way in terms of attracting people. And another company we work with was certainly getting in its own way in trying to attract female customers. It was really underrepresented. It knew it was very underrepresented in terms of female customers. And to be honest, it didn't take an awful lot of analysis to show them how masculinized their language was. And again, we just did some sample rewrites where we just neutralized it, toned it down so that the thing read much more neutrally, and it was very successful. You don't need to overtly think, oh, I need to make this attractive to women. What you need to do is to strip out the unconscious bias that gets put into writing like that.
So well said and explained, Jill. Just beautiful. So important.
Okay.
Okay, so where I want to go next, because we don't have a whole lot of time left. We've only got about 5 minutes or so left. And where I want to go next is, sharing insights. Now, that you've done this work, and you're going to come back to the organization. And I really like how you talk about the two questions that you are trying to get them to look at. One is, do you recognize the picture of us and how we are? And the other one is what? What's the second question?
Is how far is this set of assumptions serving us well?
Okay,
if we recognize them, how does it serve us well?
Those are powerful questions. If you could speak a bit to those.
Okay. Certainly, certainly. So we've started to call these the aha moment, followed by the oh dear moment, or oh no moment.
Right.
But the aha moment, if we got the analysis right, we usually do, then, one of the key things I feel very strongly about this is that we must not present this work to people as in quite a masculine way, as this is your culture, where I'm telling you this is your culture. What we do is to hold it up. I think I mentioned this earlier, to say, we're not telling you this is your culture, but this is how this culture language thing works. And in the light of it, from the way you guys talk around here, it looks like these are your unspoken assumptions, because look at these patterns. We'll show them literally a slide with lots of different examples on it of how they are doing parental voice, for example, or how they are doing or any of the other sort of many dimensions that come through in organizations. So the first question is, do you recognize this? And people generally respond viscerally. And we did some client research a while ago, and it was interesting how much the metaphor of gut came through in their language. Yeah, it was a visceral response. It's like they recognize it with their gut, and then the brain kicks in and says, my goodness, I totally recognize this, because it's their data, it's their very familiar language. I totally recognize this, and I've never seen it before. I've never seen that pattern. I've never recognized the implication of that pattern. And there's often, it's very energizing and intriguing for people. There's often laughter, as people recognize, like, oh,
yes, that's us.
We have done that. That's the moment. And that release of energy then can sometimes be swiftly followed by, as we gently prod them into the second question, is that still helpful to you? Because it used to, an organization's culture always made sense once in the past. It's that people don't make up dysfunctional cultures. What they do is they fail to see they're becoming dysfunctional as time passes, the context changes, and so on. So how far is this set of assumptions helpful to us now? What do we need to change to thrive today? What can we consciously rework? And we sometimes talk about getting people to, with a bit of help, of course, from us, sorting them into, like, what are the burdens? What are the things that are now a complete liability to us? We've really got to stop doing that. Where are there gaps? So things that we could do with boosting, perhaps, like, for example, one organization, it was deeply uncurious about the world outside it. Had so much potentially to learn and gather from its peer. It was a public sector organisation, its peer organisations and elsewhere. It just was not curious at all. So that was a definite cultural gap, as to be. And one of their principles that we derived from them was be curious. And then there's sparks, which are things that are kind of there in the culture, but maybe have got left behind, or sort of they're not strong enough, and they could do with nurturing. So little embers we kind of blow on them in to get the fire going. So some people change immediately. There is a set of people who, when we take them through a presentation of these findings, will go, I kind of understand why this thing has been so difficult, and they'll just go off and start having different conversations and interacting differently. There a small number of people sometimes realize the game is up because the old culture has suited them well, and maybe it's about to get exposed. But for most people, they're intrigued, interested. They just need then a bit of help to shape how they can work with it.
What it's just such beautiful work. I love to do it as well. And your approach, I've learned a lot from you about how you do your work. You and your team do your work. I want to give you the chance to close the conversation. First, let me say thank you very much for coming on. It's been amazing to learn from you, to read your work, and to share you with my listeners and viewers across the world. What would you like to leave them with today?
Well, I think I'm going to hang on really about what I started to say at the beginning. I think there are three things that annoyed me about the way that culture is often talked about. One is it's often described as mystical and unknowable. Well, it's not unknowable. You just have to find the right way in. Right. Culture sometimes can be the thing that gets counted. We'd count it in a survey, and I just fundamentally believe that it's too unconscious or semi-conscious and emotional to be counted in that way. People cannot tell you about the culture, otherwise they would do so. And the third, and so I feel that actually addressing culture in this way gives the power back to the people who actually can change it. Power's maybe too strong, but it puts it equips your people to choose to behave differently. Culture changes not because people get told to change, but because they see the sense of changing and they are given then some help to move in that direction. So I think that's what I'd like to leave people with, is a kind of culture is by and for everyone.
What a beautiful way to close, Jill. Thank you again for coming and working on purpose and writing your book and sharing it with the world.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more about Gill Ereaut and the work she does at Linguistic Landscapes and her new book, The Way We Talk Around Here. You can start by visiting her website. It's linguisticlandscapes.com. Linguisticlandscapes.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, we were on with Rich Fernandez and Carolina Lasso talking about their book, The Purpose Reset, which teaches how to realign purpose at every level, individual, team, organizational, and transforming workplaces into more compassionate, engaged, and high-performing environments. Next week, we'll be on the air with Wendy Lipton-Dibner talking about her new book, What Matters Most, How Leaders Build Impassioned Engagement, Unrivaled Loyalty, and Boundless Growth by Measuring Real-World Impact. See you there. And remember, work is one of the best means in realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, and it can give us the chance to do business that betters the world. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.